The delicate art of resurrecting a 1988 Banzai Run pinball machine requires three things: a surgically steady hand, the patience of a saint who has been dead for several centuries, and absolute, unequivocal silence. I had 2 out of 3. My hand was as steady as a rock, and the silence in my workshop was so profound I could hear the microscopic sizzle of the soldering iron as it kissed a tiny capacitor on the main logic board. The patience, well, that was always a work in progress. My business, Murphy's Mobile Power, occupies a sweet little commercial-zoned lot that my dad bought back when this whole area was just fields and ambition. Now it's a monument to my desire to be left alone, wedged uncomfortably against the pristine beige-on-beige perfection of the Chesapeake Meadows subdivision. My workshop is my sanctuary, a chaotic cathedral of wires, tools, and the glorious smell of ozone and old machinery. Today, that sanctuary was dedicated to the sacred task of making a tiny metal ball go ding again. I leaned closer, the wisp of solder smoke curling past my nose. Just one more connection. One more perfect, silvery joint, and this board would live again. My tongue was sticking out of the corner of my mouth in concentration. The iron hovered, descended, and the world went dark. The light above my workbench vanished. The low hum of the air conditioner died. The classic rock station playing softly on the radio cut out mid-guitar solo. But it wasn't just my workshop. The silence that fell was bigger. It was a smothering blanket thrown over the entire block. I straightened up, blinking in the sudden gloom, my eyes adjusting to the daylight filtering through the big roll-up door. The pinball machine was dead. My soldering iron was cooling uselessly in its stand. A primal grunt of frustration escaped my lips. I hate being interrupted. Then came the new sound. It started as a low murmur, then swelled into a chorus of distinctly panicked voices. It was coming from next door, from the brand new, gleaming white building that had just opened a month ago. The Chesapeake Meadows Fresenius Dialysis Center. I put my tools down and walked to the open bay door, squinting into the bright afternoon sun. That's when I saw her. A nurse, her blue scrubs a slash of urgent color against the manicured green lawn, running toward my lot. Her face was pale, her expression tight with a specific kind of professional fear that sets off every alarm bell in your body. "Do you have power?" she called out, her voice strained. She didn't even stop to catch her breath. "Not a lick," I said, gesturing back into my darkened workshop. "Whole block's out. What's going on?" She finally stopped, putting a hand on her chest. "Our backup generator failed. It just stopped. We have 36 patients in there. Half of them are mid-treatment." She looked past me, toward the silent building, then back at me, her eyes wide. "Our battery backups are on, but they're for emergency transfers. They'll buy us minutes, not hours." My brain, the pragmatic, logistical part that runs my business, started clicking through possibilities. A transformer blowout? A squirrel getting friendly with a high-voltage line? But the generator failure was the weird part. Those things are built with triple redundancy. They're designed to be the one thing that doesn't fail. "Failed to kick on?" I asked, frowning. "Those things are supposed to be foolproof." The nurse, whose name tag read Maria, shook her head, a frantic, jerky motion. "Oh, it kicked on. We heard it. It ran for maybe 90 seconds. Then it went silent right after some woman with a clipboard and the angriest visor I've ever seen had a screaming match with our facility manager." A clipboard, an angry visor. A cold, dreadful certainty began to dawn in the pit of my stomach. I knew exactly what kind of natural disaster had struck the dialysis center, and it wasn't an act of God. It was an act of Brenda. I told Maria to hang tight and walked over, my boots crunching on the gravel that separated my blue-collar reality from Chesapeake Meadows' suburban dream. The air was thick with a weird mix of fresh-cut grass and low-grade panic. As I got closer, I could see the facility manager, a guy named Dave I'd met once, standing by a large, silent, beige metal box. He was on his cell phone, his face the color of putty, and from his posture I could tell he was on the receiving end of a world-class chewing out. A power company truck was already on site, which was impressively fast. The lineman, a big guy with a sun-beaten face and a look of profound weariness, was leaning against his truck, arms crossed. He looked less like a man ready to fix a problem and more like a UN peacekeeper who'd just been told the ceasefire was off. "She did it again, didn't she?" I said to him, not as a question. The lineman, whose name tag read Frank, let out a long, slow sigh. "Brenda with a B," he confirmed, shaking his head. "She's a force of nature, that one." "What was it this time?" "The generator," he said, hooking a thumb toward the beige box. "Apparently it's an unapproved external modification. She says the concrete pad it's sitting on violates Aesthetic Code 14B, uniformity of ground cover, and the noise from its weekly 30-second test run violates Bylaw 7, subsection C, paragraph 4, aesthetic harmony and auditory serenity." He recited the code with the dead-eyed tone of a man who had been forced to memorize scripture against his will. Dave, the manager, made a strangled noise and turned away from us. His shoulders slumped. "Auditory serenity?" I repeated. "It's a life-saving medical device. What did she expect, for it to run on happy thoughts and unicorn whispers?" Frank almost smiled. "You'd be surprised. She's been sending them violation notices for months. Certified letters, the works. They ignored them, probably because they thought, we're a dialysis center, not some yahoo building a tiki bar. Big mistake." "So she just, came over and threw a wrench in it?" "Worse," Frank said, a note of grudging awe in his voice. "She found a loophole. The main power junction for this whole commercial strip runs through an easement on HOA property. It's a screwy setup from the development deal. She declared their backup generator a persistent and uncorrected safety and aesthetic hazard. Then she used her authority over that easement to have us, the utility, perform an emergency disconnect on the building's main line, pending a full HOA architectural review." I stared at him. "You're kidding me. She got the power company to cut power to a dialysis center?" "She had a binder, man," Frank said, holding his hands about 3 inches apart. A 3-inch binder, laminated tabs, color-coded sections. She had blueprints, signed affidavits from neighbors complaining about the unsettling rumble, and a printed copy of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that was highlighted and full of little sticky notes. My supervisor looked at the potential lawsuit from the HOA versus the presumed impossibility of the situation, and chose the path of least resistance. He told me to shut him down. Just then, Dave hung up his phone, looking like he'd aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. His face was pale, slick with sweat. "They're telling me it could be 48 hours, he said, his voice a hollow whisper. "Minimum. Before they can even schedule a review, we have to evacuate. We have to call ambulances and transfer every single patient to 3 different hospitals across the county." He ran a shaky hand through his hair. "Do you have any idea the logistics of moving a dozen people mid-dialysis? The risk? It's a nightmare." I looked at Dave's despairing face. I looked at the dialysis center, where I could see the faint, worried shapes of people moving behind the tinted windows. I looked at the pristine, manicured lawns of Chesapeake Meadows, a monument to petty tyranny. Then I looked back toward my lot. My eyes fell upon my inheritance, my albatross, my masterpiece. Sitting in the far corner of the yard was a machine my father had lovingly, and perhaps insanely, dubbed The Beast. It was a massive 6-axle, deep blue Peterbilt semi-truck, but instead of a standard trailer, it hauled a custom-built, sound-attenuated shipping container. Painted on the side in clean, stark white letters were the words MMP 1.2 Megawatt Mobile Power. And I started to smile. The Beast was my dad's magnum opus. He'd sunk a small fortune into building it, a rolling power plant designed for the big leagues, 3-day rock festivals, Hollywood movie sets filming in the middle of nowhere, FEMA disaster relief contracts. It was for my day-to-day business of powering farmers' markets and local carnivals the definition of overkill. It was expensive to insure, thirstier for diesel than a frat boy on spring break, and so ridiculously oversized that just maneuvering it out of the lot was a 10-minute affair of careful turns and constant mirror checks. I'd always seen it as a bit of a white elephant, a monument to my dad's go big or go home philosophy, but today, it looked like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Using it to power the building 50 feet away was like using a tactical nuclear weapon to kill a spider. A beautiful, glorious, multi-million-dollar 1.2 megawatt spider-killing nuke. I turned to Dave, who was now staring blankly at the silent generator as if hoping to intimidate it back to life. "I can have you back online in 20 minutes, I said. He slowly turned his head, his expression uncomprehending. "What? How?" A smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. "With an approved, non-permanent mobile external modification." I didn't wait for his reply. I turned and walked back toward my lot, the gravel crunching decisively under my boots. The jingle of the massive set of keys I pulled from my pocket sounded less like keys and more like a knight donning his armor. I climbed the 3 steep steps up into the cab of the Beast, the door closing with the solid kerchunk of a bank vault. The air inside smelled of diesel, worn leather, and potential energy. I slid the key into the ignition. It was a comically large key for a comically large truck. I paused for a second, my hand on the key, and offered a silent thanks to my old man's particular brand of magnificent over-engineering. Then I turned it. The dashboard lights flickered to life. Gauges swept back and forth. A low-level alarm beeped, then silenced itself. I pushed the starter button. For a moment, nothing. Then, a deep, guttural cough from the 30-liter diesel engine housed inside the container behind me. Another cough, and then the Beast roared to life. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical event. The ground vibrated. The cab trembled around me. The air itself seemed to thicken with the sheer power of it. The engine settled from a roar into a deep, thrumming idle that was less a noise and more a fundamental frequency of the universe. It was a sound that promised noise ordinance violations, a sound that laughed in the face of aesthetic harmony. It was the most beautiful, defiant, and gloriously anti-Brenda sound I had ever heard in my life. The war for Chesapeake Meadows had begun. Maneuvering the Beast into position was like docking a battleship in a swimming pool. I eased it out of my lot, the air brakes hissing like an angry dragon, and parked it on the strip of asphalt that ran parallel to the dialysis center. The truck was so long it took up 3 normal parking spaces. Its massive blue form dwarfed the ornamental pear trees and manicured box hedges that lined the property, casting a shadow that probably violated some HOA rule about unapproved solar deprivation. From the corner of my eye, I saw curtains twitching in the windows of the beige houses across the street. A few residents, drawn by the engine's primal hum, were stepping out onto their perfect, weed-free lawns, their faces a mixture of confusion and disapproval. This was not in the brochure. My first call was to my go-to guys, Sal and Mikey, a father and son duo of electrical contractors who had seen more weirdness in this county than anyone had a right to. 10 minutes later, Their beat-to-hell white work van came rattling down the street and pulled up behind my truck. Sal, a grizzled veteran with a face like a road map of every bad decision he'd ever made, got out and took in the scene. He looked at the beast, then at the dialysis center, then back at the beast. He let out a long, low whistle. "Gonna use the big boy for this, huh, Jackie?" he said, his voice a gravelly rasp. "What's she done this time?" He didn't need to ask who she was. Sal had tangled with local bureaucracy more times than he'd had hot meals. His son, Mikey, a younger, more enthusiastic version of Sal with fewer cynical edges, bounced out of the passenger side, his eyes wide. "Whoa, boss, this thing is incredible. It could power a small town." "Yeah, and it drinks diesel like I drink coffee," Sal grumbled, though I saw a twinkle in his eye. He loved a challenge. "You billing this to them?" I shook my head, popping open the side panels on the generator container to reveal a terrifyingly complex switchboard of breakers, dials, and thick copper bus bars. "Nah, I'm billing this to my personal pain in the HOA fund. It's got a pretty high limit." Sal cracked a grin. "My man." The next 20 minutes were a symphony of loud, professional competence. We unspooled the main feeder cables from the truck's powered reels. These weren't your garden variety extension cords. They were as thick as a python that had just swallowed a goat, heavy and unwieldy. The three of us grunted and sweated as we hauled them over to the building's main transfer switch, the one Frank the lineman had reluctantly shut down. The dialogue was a rapid-fire trade language. "Got the cam locks? Mikey, get the grounding rod. I want a 5-foot minimum sink on this one. Check the phase rotation. I don't want to spin their pumps backward. Synchronization is green. Ready for the load, boss." Mikey, while helping me lug a cable, couldn't stop staring at the engine. "Geez, Jack, you could jumpstart a planet with this thing." "That's the plan for next week," I shot back. "Today we're just saving Tuesday." With the cables securely locked into the transfer switch, I walked back to my control panel on the side of the truck. The small crowd of residents had grown. I could feel their eyes on me. I could especially feel one pair of eyes, burning with the heat of 1,000 suns, from a pristine white SUV that had just pulled up and parked aggressively at the end of the street. Brenda had arrived. I ignored her for the moment. There were more important things to do. "All right, Sal, stand by," I yelled over the engine's hum. I flipped a series of smaller breakers, bringing the internal systems online. Then, my hand hovered over the main breaker. It was a huge, satisfyingly chunky lever. This was the moment of truth. I grabbed it with both hands and threw it. Ka-thunk! The sound was deep and final. The engine note of the beast immediately changed. The low thrum deepened into a powerful, resonant hum as it took on the full electrical load of the dialysis center. The lights on my panel glowed a steady, reassuring green. I looked up at the building. For a second, nothing. Then, the lights inside flickered on. A heartbeat later, a cheer erupted from within, a wave of sound so full of relief and joy it was clearly audible even over my generator. Through the front window I saw Maria, the nurse. She looked right at me, her panicked expression replaced by a wide, tearful grin. She gave me a fervent, two-handed thumbs up. We had done it. We had brought them back online. The victory, however, was destined to be very, very short-lived. The white SUV's door swung open. Out of the SUV stepped Brenda with a B. She was exactly as I pictured. Mid-50s, clad in tan capri pants and a ruthlessly ironed pink polo shirt. A white visor was clamped to her head so tightly it seemed to be actively squeezing angry thoughts out of her brain. And in her left hand, held with the reverence of a holy text, was the clipboard. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She didn't yell. Not at first. She simply marched onto the lawn and began taking pictures with her phone, documenting the scene of the crime. The massive truck, the thick black cables snaking across the grass. Me, standing there in my greasy work jeans and MMP t-shirt. Each photo was taken with a sharp, stabbing motion, as if she were inflicting tiny wounds with her iPhone. Then came the accusations, delivered in a voice that could curdle milk from 50 paces. Unlicensed commercial operation, noise ordinance violation, unregistered heavy vehicle parked in a non-designated zone, violation of fluid containment protocols. Or, it's a truck, not a Superfund site, I muttered to Sal. Sal just shook his head. Showtime. Brenda, having completed her photographic evidence gathering, had of course escalated things. As if on cue, 2 police cruisers, sirens respectfully off, pulled up to the curb. Out stepped 2 officers who could have been cast in a cop movie. The first was Officer Krupke, a man whose face was etched with the weary resignation of someone just a few years from a pension and a fishing boat. He'd seen it all, and none of it impressed him anymore. The second was Officer Dooley, a rookie so young his uniform still looked stiff and unnatural on him. His eyes were wide, and he practically radiated a belief that the world could be perfected if everyone just followed the rules in the book. "All right, folks, what's the issue here?" Krupke asked, his voice calm and slow, addressing the scene as a whole. Brenda marched right up to him, clipboard at the ready. "Officer, I am Brenda Wallace, President of the Chesapeake Meadows Homeowners Association. I am reporting multiple, flagrant violations. This man," she pointed a trembling finger at me, "is operating a commercial-grade industrial engine in a residential adjacent zone after 5 p.m. It is a clear violation of City Noise Ordinance 113.8. Krupke looked at the truck, then at me, then at the lit-up dialysis center. "Ma'am, is this the vehicle that's providing power to the medical facility?" "That is irrelevant," Brenda snapped. "The rules are the rules." I decided it was time to speak up. "Ma'am, with all due respect, the dialysis center is a commercial operation. I'm just providing emergency power that they were denied because you decided their backup generator was ugly." The rookie, Dooley, turned to me, his hand inching toward his notepad. "Sir, do you have a permit for this deployment?" Before I could answer, Krupke shot him a sideways glance. "A permit for what? Stopping people from dying? Let's take a breath, son." He then turned back to me. "Let me see your license and the vehicle registration, please." As I handed them over, Brenda continued her tirade. "The cables are a trip hazard. The emissions are polluting our pristine air. This is not what our residents signed up for when they bought into this community." "This is a legally registered commercial vehicle," I said, keeping my voice as level as Krupke's. "It's parked on my own commercial property, not HOA land. My contractors are licensed and insured. The only thing not happening by the book here is a civilian shutting off power to a critical medical facility." Krupke handed my license back. Everything was in order, as I knew it would be. He looked at Brenda, then at the growing crowd of onlookers, then at the heavens, as if seeking guidance. He understood the optics. He understood the reality. He let out another one of those world-weary sighs. He pulled me a few feet aside, lowering his voice. "Look, kid," he said, the picture of grizzled wisdom. "I get what you're doing here, and believe me, we all know Brenda. She's a nightmare. The dispatchers play rock, paper, scissors to see who has to take her calls, but she knows the codes, inside and out. Technically," he gestured with his chin at the beast, "that truck, parked here for an extended period providing a utility, could be classified as a temporary structure. She's going to bury you, the city, and that clinic in paperwork, fines, and injunctions. You bought them time, but you haven't won the war. Not by a long shot." He was right, and I knew it. This was just the opening salvo. The scene had now officially curdled into a full-blown suburban spectacle. The population of Chesapeake Meadows had seemingly divided into two distinct, warring factions. Camp Brenda consisted of a few residents who had ventured out to stand near her, nodding in agreement as she pointed out the various infractions against their delicate sensibilities. "I work from home," one man in a golf shirt complained to Officer Dooley, who was dutifully taking notes. "I do mindfulness coaching over Zoom. How am I supposed to project calm with that thrumming in the background?" Another woman, clutching a tiny, trembling dog, added, "Poopsie is traumatized by the vibrations. He hasn't been able to enjoy his organic, gluten-free jerky." But they were the minority. The other side, Camp Jack, was larger and growing. People were horrified by the story, which was now spreading through the crowd like wildfire. A woman brought Sal, Mikey, and me a tray of bottled water. Another followed with a plate of sandwiches. An elderly man with a kind face and a slight tremor in his hands shuffled over to me, his eyes misty. "My Margaret is in there," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She goes 3 times a week. Thank you, son. Thank you for what you're doing." He patted my arm, and I suddenly felt like I was about to violate my own personal bylaw against public displays of emotion. The whole drama was being chronicled by a new, pivotal character. A lanky teenager in a hoodie who was filming the entire confrontation on his phone, providing a running commentary for his TikTok followers. He was weaving through the crowd, capturing Brenda's rants, Krupke's weary expressions, and Mikey proudly polishing the chrome on the beast's grill. Suddenly, the kid's eyes went wide. He stopped filming and started tapping furiously at his screen. "No way," he muttered. "No freaking way." He jogged over to me, holding out his phone. "Dude, you gotta see this." On the screen was a PDF document from the Chesapeake Meadows HOA public website. It was the minutes from an HOA meeting held last February. "Check it out," the kid said, pointing. "This is where she got that auditory serenity bylaw passed. See? Attendance 4. Brenda Wallace, 2 of her board cronies, and someone named Ethel who fell asleep halfway through." The bylaw was specifically proposed to address the growing visual and auditory blight of unapproved solar panel installations. She's using a rule designed to stop people from going green to shut down a dialysis center. This was good. This was very good. But Brenda was too far gone to be deterred by facts or context. Ignoring the rising murmur of disapproval from the crowd, she climbed onto a small decorative rock. Another bylaw violation, I was sure, to address her public. "This will not stand," she announced, her voice rising to a shrill crescendo. "I am calling for an emergency HOA board vote, effective immediately. We will have this monstrosity towed and impounded, and we will fine its owner for every single minute it remains in operation, poisoning our community." She looked around, her eyes wild. "We will not be held hostage by industrial terrorism." The kid with the phone got a perfect close-up of that last line. I had a feeling Brenda was about to become very, very famous, and I knew exactly who I had to call next. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for Chloe, my lawyer. She specialized in zoning disputes, contract law, and, unofficially, navigating the choppy waters of industrial-grade absurdity. She answered on the second ring. "Jack, my favorite purveyor of oversized power solutions," she said, her voice a breezy, caffeinated whirlwind. "Don't tell me you dropped a generator on a prize-winning poodle." "Worse," I said, turning away from the crowd for a semblance of privacy. "HOA trouble." "Ooh, the fun kind," she said. "Hit me." I gave her the 30-second version. Dialysis center, Brenda, the clipboard, the binder, the emergency disconnect, and the bylaw about auditory serenity. There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a sound that I could only describe as a bark of pure, unadulterated legal glee. "She cited what bylaw?" Chloe practically squealed. "The anti-solar panel one?" "Oh, Jack, this is beautiful. This isn't a case, it's a work of art. She cut power to a dialysis center? The discovery phase alone is going to be a comedy goldmine. Okay, listen to me. Don't move the truck. Don't engage with her further. Sit tight. You're not a villain. You're a temporary emergency utility provider. I'm filing for an emergency injunction against the HOA for reckless endangerment right now. This is the most fun I'm going to have all year." "Good to know my misery is your entertainment," I said dryly. "It's my job," she chirped. "Text me pictures, all of them, especially of the clipboard." I hung up, feeling marginally better. Having Chloe in your corner was like having a tactical honey badger on retainer. By now, the TikTok kids' efforts had paid off. A van with a local news station logo on the side had pulled up. A reporter and a cameraman hopped out, their eyes scanning the scene and landing, inevitably, on the biggest, loudest object in the vicinity, the beast. Brenda saw the camera and underwent a stunning transformation. Her face softened from a mask of rage into one of pained, profound concern. She clasped her hands together and approached the reporter with the somber gravity of a woman reporting a tragedy. "I'm just so worried about the residents," she said, her voice now dripping with saccharine sympathy. "The noise, the fumes. We have children. We have pets. We have property values to protect. We all feel for the people in that center, of course, but rules are what separate us from anarchy." The reporter, a young woman who looked like she smelled a good story, nodded seriously, then turned to me as the camera swung in my direction. "Sir, can we get your side of this?" My phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe. "Keep it simple. You're the good guy." I took a breath. "My name is Jack Murphy. I run Murphy's Mobile Power. The power to the dialysis center next door was shut off. They have dozens of patients inside who need electricity to live. So I'm giving it to them. That's it. That's the whole story." The reporter then interviewed a visibly emotional Nurse Maria, who gave a powerful, heartfelt plea about her patients, describing in no uncertain terms what happens when a dialysis treatment is interrupted. The whole time, Sal and Mikey had been quietly doing their own thing. They hadn't been watching the drama. They'd been huddled over a set of rolled-up blueprints they'd retrieved from their van, the original site plans for the whole development. Suddenly, Sal slapped Mikey on the back with a loud crack. "That's it!" he crowed. "I knew there was something screwy." They strode over to where Officer Krupke and I were standing, unrolling the blueprint on the hood of his cruiser. Sal stabbed a thick, grease-stained finger at a specific spot on the map. "Here," he said, his voice electric with discovery. "This is the main electrical junction for the commercial lots. See this note?" He pointed to a block of tiny text. "Junction box and easement to be deeded to North County Power and Light upon completion of Phase 2, estimated June 1st. Krupke leaned in. "Phase 2 was the houses across the street. They finished that over a year ago." "Exactly," Sal said. "This junction box isn't HOA common property. It hasn't been for months. It was supposed to be signed over to the utility company. The only reason it wasn't is because the paperwork was never filed." I looked at him, the gears turning in my head. "And who's in charge of filing all the official HOA paperwork?" Sal grinned a triumphant, tobacco-stained grin. "The HOA president." Krupke took off his hat and slowly wiped his brow. He looked over at Brenda, who was still giving her heart-wrenching performance for the news camera. "So, you're telling me," he said slowly, "that she's been wielding authority over a piece of public utility infrastructure that she has no legal right to control?" "Bingo!" Mikey chirped. "She's not just a Karen. She's committing a felony." The emergency HOA meeting was held that evening in the Chesapeake Meadows Community Clubhouse, a building so aggressively beige it seemed to absorb all light and joy from its surroundings. It was standing room only. The air was thick with the scent of cheap coffee, simmering resentment, and Brenda's lavender-scented air fresheners, which were fighting a losing battle against the collective anger of the room. Brenda stood at a lectern at the front, flanked by her two loyal board members, a nervous-looking man who kept adjusting his tie, and a woman with a haircut so severe it looked like a helmet. Brenda banged a gavel with far more force than necessary. "This emergency session is now in order," she declared, her voice echoing slightly in the crowded room. "The sole item on the agenda is the illegal industrial incursion at our border, and the levying of fines against the perpetrator, Mr. Jack Murphy." A murmur of discontent rippled through the crowd. "Point of order, Madam President," a voice called out. All heads turned. It was Chloe, my lawyer. She was standing in the back, looking sharp and dangerous in a tailored pantsuit. Beside her stood me, Sal, Mikey, and Dave from the Dialysis Center. We looked like the most bizarrely assembled superhero team in history. "You are not a resident," Brenda sneered. "You have no voice here." "I'm here as legal counsel for Mr. Murphy, whom you've placed on this ridiculous agenda," Chloe said, striding forward, a tablet in her hand. "And I'm also here as a concerned citizen, seeing as my own aunt happens to be one of the patients your actions endangered today." The room erupted in whispers. Brenda's face paled slightly. "Now?" Chloe said, her voice cutting through the noise like a scalpel. "Before we discuss any fines, perhaps we should discuss the matter of jurisdiction." She projected her tablet screen onto a pull-down projector screen at the front of the room. The first image was the site plan Sal had found. Calmly and surgically, Chloe walked the entire room through their discovery. She explained how the electrical junction was, by law, the property of North County Power and Light. She showed them the clause in the development contract. She then put up an email from a VP at the power company confirming they had been waiting on the final transfer of deed paperwork from the HOA for over 6 months. Paperwork that had to be signed and filed by the HOA president. "So, you see," Chloe concluded, her voice deceptively sweet, "when Brenda Wallace ordered the power company to disconnect the dialysis center, she wasn't acting as an HOA president protecting her community. She was impersonating a public utility official and illegally tampering with infrastructure that doesn't belong to her. Not only did she recklessly endanger the lives of 36 people, but she has single-handedly exposed this entire homeowners association to a multi-million-dollar lawsuit from the Fresenius Medical Care Corporation, not to mention felony charges from the state." "You could have heard a pin drop." Brenda stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape. The two board members beside her looked like they wanted the beige carpet to swallow them whole. But we weren't done. That was just the legal uppercut. Sal and Mikey stepped forward for the knockout blow. "Furthermore," Sal grumbled, taking the remote for the projector, "while we were looking into things, we couldn't help but notice a few other discrepancies." He clicked the remote. The next image on the screen was a high-resolution photo of Brenda's own house. A red circle was drawn around a cheerful-looking garden gnome fishing in a bird bath. "Bylaw 22A," Mikey read from a piece of paper, his voice dripping with mock seriousness. "No yard ornamentation of a whimsical or fantastical nature." Click. A new photo, this one of Brenda's fence, with a measuring tape held up against it. "Fence measures 6 feet 2 inches, Sal said. "Bylaw 18C. Fences shall not exceed a height of 6 feet. Click. A satellite dish tucked behind a bush. Click. A basketball hoop with a non-regulation backboard. Click. A brand of mailbox explicitly forbidden in the HOA's approved postal receptacles guide. With each click, the room got louder. It started as titters, then grew to open laughter, and finally to outright jeers of hypocrite. The slideshow was a masterpiece of pettiness, the perfect weapon to use against a tyrant who ruled by the petty letter of the law. The coup de grace was a picture of her white SUV, parked on the street, with one tire clearly touching the edge of her neighbor's lawn. Bylaw 9F, Chloe said, stepping back up. No vehicle shall encroach upon a neighboring property's designated green space. The room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting. The man whose lawn had been violated was pointing at Brenda, his face purple with rage. It was glorious, beautiful anarchy. Brenda banged her gavel, but the sound was lost in the roar of the crowd. "This meeting is a sham!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You are all in violation!" But her power was broken. Her binder of rules was useless against a room full of people who had just seen the wizard behind the curtain. The nervous board member snatched the gavel from her, banged it until he got a semblance of quiet, and yelled, "I call for a vote of no confidence in President Wallace!" A deafening roar of "Aye!" shook the clubhouse. Brenda stood for a moment, her face a thunderous mask of defeat. She snatched her binder from the lectern, clutching it to her chest like a shield, and stormed out the back door without another word. The reign of Brenda with a B was over. The next morning, 2 trucks from North County Power and Light were on site. They weren't there to disconnect anything. They were there with a crew to permanently restore the dialysis center's connection, replace the now infamous junction box, and officially take over the infrastructure that should have been theirs all along. The whole operation was overseen by a supervisor who studiously avoided making eye contact with me, but gave me a curt, almost imperceptible nod of respect. My part in the drama was over. Sal, Mikey, and I went about the much quieter task of disconnecting the beast. We coiled the thick python cables back onto their reels. We shut down the breakers and killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the initial power outage had been. The low hum that had become the background music to the revolution was gone. As we worked, a small procession of neighbors came by. The elderly man whose wife was a patient shook my hand, pressing a $20 bill into it, which I politely refused. The mindfulness coach sheepishly apologized, admitting his Zoom calls had never been more exciting. Even the woman with the traumatized dog, Poopsie, came by to say that her dog had, in fact, been fine. The whole neighborhood seemed lighter, friendlier, as if a low-grade fever had broken. When we finally pulled the beast back into my lot, the residents who were out gave us a small, scattered round of applause. Dave, the dialysis center manager, came out and shook my hand so hard I thought he might dislocate my shoulder. He was a new man, relaxed and smiling. "They're putting up a plaque, you know," he said, "for distinguished community service. It's got your business name on it." "Just send me a picture," I said with a laugh. "I don't need a plaque." "Well, you're getting one," he insisted. "And the parent company is covering your fuel costs and then some. Consider it a thank you bonus." A week later, life was mostly back to normal. I was back in my workshop, the comforting scent of solder once again filling the air. I'd finally gotten the logic board for the bonsai run fixed. The satisfying dings and thwacks of a successful game in progress were the only sounds disturbing the peace. My business phone, however, was ringing off the hook. Apparently, being the hero in a viral news story where you take down a power-mad HOA president is good for business. I had bookings for the beast for the next 6 months. That afternoon, a courier delivered a large, flat package. It was from the dialysis center. Inside was a framed thank you card, the matting around it signed by dozens of people, patients and staff, with little notes of gratitude. "Thanks for keeping my grandpa's blood clean. You're a rock star, my hero." Tucked inside was a gift certificate to the best steakhouse in the county for an amount of money that was frankly obscene. I propped the card up on a workbench. I looked at the signatures, then out the open bay door at the beast. It sat there gleaming in the afternoon sun, silent and patient, its massive engine cool. It no longer looked like an albatross or a white elephant. It looked like a guardian, a big blue diesel-powered guardian. I gave it a little salute. "Okay, Dad," I said quietly to the empty workshop. "Maybe it's not such a white elephant after all."